Okay, so we're we're now ready to go into part three in conservation biology. Uh, we're talking about direct value of species or biomes or ecosystems in part two, and at that point we were discussing the pharmaceutical values, the monetary values I can gain from a species because of drug properties or health properties, etc. Very, very important things to think about. That's a great way to convince people, hey, this thing has billions of dollars of value. We may want to keep it around. So that's one way to convince people, looking at the medicinal value of species, ecosystems, etc. And what is changing or has changed and is continuing to change with conservation is we're moving away from this focus on save a species because of our increased understanding of ecology. You have to save ecosystems. I can't save the rosy periwinkle if it doesn't have a place to live. I'm not going to grow millions of these things in a greenhouse. I'm not going to grow millions of Pacific yews in a greenhouse. I need to save ecosystems. So we'll get into that when we talk about conservation, how we establish conservation plans. And it's moved away from save the species to a larger landscape picture. All right, so again, we'll get into that down the road here in a bit. All right, so here's a good example of why we want to focus on intact ecosystems. Here's just some financials. The economic value of a mangrove. So mangroves, pioneer species. We talked about these guys back in Succession when we were looking at how islands form in the Caribbean. They make land. They're not, again, not pretty. They're not a place you'd say, oh, I want to go and just relax in the mangroves. But there's major economic value to an intact ecosystem compared to if I cut down those mangroves and turn into a shrimp farm. So this is the comparison of the economic value of an intact mangrove in Thailand versus a shrimp farm. So intact mangroves, when you look at the financials, they're worth about $60,000 a hectare. Hectare is about 3 acres. If I chop all these down, get rid of all the mangroves, and turn it into a shrimp farm, and hey, everybody likes shrimp. That's supposed to be a shrimp. Give them a little antenna. Then the economic value goes down to about 18,000 US per hectare. So same piece of land, significantly less value. The challenge is, well, shrimp farming, I can easily see how I can make that money. I sell shrimp. I open up a business. I employ people. Intact mangroves, well, can you really make money off of them? Can you sell anything, any product from that and create a business around it? That's the hard part. But there is a huge economic value to coastal protection, decreased erosion, increased biodiversity, all of those things. So this is where we come back to developers and say, let's look at the difference here. 60,000 versus 18. From a business perspective, what's more important? Tropical rainforest, go without saying, same exact picture. Huge, huge value if they're left standing. Lots of significant economic value. If it's sustainably harvested, you can make money over and over and over. A big factor, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, this is supposed to be ecotourism. I can't go and do ecotourism in a plantation. Not really exciting. I'm not going to see monkeys and jaguars and all sorts of beautiful rainforest biodiversity looking at a palm plantation. So again, it's trying to convince people and show them there are different ways to make money off of ecosystems. And usually if they're intact, you're going to make more money. So, all right, so we have some different economic values. Another category of value, direct value, is agriculture. What will that land or that ecosystem produce? Just look at Illinois. Corn, beans. We do have some wheat, alfalfa, orchards, vineyards. We can make money off of this. So there's that weighing it out. All right, how much can I make per acre if I'm a farmer? What is my land worth? Is it worth more as a natural ecosystem, like a native prairie? Or is it worth more turning that prairie into a cornfield? Where do I get more value? So depending on the economy and all sorts of different factors, there is often incentive, economic and agricultural incentive to convert native ecosystems into agriculture. They call it sod busters. Rip up the prairie and turn it into corn and beans. Good for the economy, but is that good in the big picture of biodiversity and all sorts of other things that we look at? That's all part of environmental science where you study that kind of stuff. But agricultural value is another direct value. I don't make any money off of a prairie, but I can make how many dollars per acre off of a cornfield. Consumptive. Can I eat it? Is it an edible product? So think about all the fish in that net. How much money can I make selling those fish? What is my cost to go and harvest, to clean, to process, to sell? There's a direct value. So if the species has these values, we often want to keep them around. Think about the price of tuna, swordfish, salmon. There's a direct consumptive value to those species. Okay, so those are all the dollar amounts that we often focus on. And I don't want to, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. We have to make money. But we do need to think about it and say, okay, $1 today or $10 tomorrow. Sometimes you have no choice but to go for the dollar today. And I understand that, respect that. We should all respect that. Sometimes that is where people are at, societies and cultures are at. We have to focus on short-term goals and gains. We can't think long-term. In developed countries, though, we do tend to have greater opportunity to think long-term. And that changes, obviously, based upon the economy and society and different areas of the country. But when we can think long-term, we may want to really start to readjust our priorities and focus on things known as indirect values. Now, sometimes you will see ecosystems have indirect economic value. So you go, oh, okay, it's hard to put an actual specific dollar on this, but there is an economic value. All right, so those mangroves, if you have an intact mangrove, that helps purify water, clean the water. It's a major buffer against storm damage. I've seen this in the Caribbean. Areas that have mangroves, when hurricanes come through, their buildings suffer far less damage than those big, beautiful white beaches that are right up against, or the buildings are right up against the ocean and there's no buffer in between. When and they're going to always, when the hurricane comes through, it just decimates those buildings and destroys them. You also then can possibly have loss of life and people getting hurt. There's a huge value there. millions of dollars of economic loss to your building because you don't have mangroves, or a buffer against that damage. Different things can help retain minerals and nutrients. Filter strips, big strips of grass along the edges of farm fields that are the fields that are sloped. If you leave a buffer strip of grass, 15, 20, whatever feet wide, it helps retain the minerals and the nutrients in your soil. Instead of, well, if I till all the way up to the edge, we get these 1.5 inches of rain in the spring, there goes your topsoil. Now, what did you lose there? Well, you just lost dirt, but that means you have to put more fertilizer down to replace the dirt that was lost because of the minerals and the nutrients that were lost. So now you have an increased cost every year because you didn't retain a filter strip of grass. Ecosystems, species detoxify pollutants. Breaking down, recycling organic wastes. Regulation of climate. I'm just going to let's do it in big letters, and etc. There are dozens and dozens of things that can be attributed to healthy ecosystems, and there are direct economic values to those things. Right? So we have to recognize this. This is an important thing. This saves you money down the road. Not today, but down the road is where you save money by understanding indirect economic values. So here's erosion. Preventing erosion with those trees on the bank of that river. So imagine if that river, all that soil erodes and the water quality of the river goes bad. Who's going to fish there? Who's going to swim there? Who's going to camp and go boating? So now the bait shop that was dependent upon all that business closes. You've just lost jobs. So if the water quality of your lake goes down, the fish population crashes, the lake's polluted, all the businesses that focused on that lake and that activity are going to suffer as well. Water purification. Intact ecosystems help clean and purify water. Bird watching, nature hikes, etc. Tourism. That would all fall under ecotourism. So there are just unbelievable values that we can't, it's difficult to quantify and put a dollar on to say this is worth 2,000 or 8 million or whatever dollars, but these are incredibly important things to pay attention to. And your kidneys are important because they detoxify pollutants in your body. Imagine getting rid of your kidneys. Yeah, you're going to be alive, but it's not going to be really fun, it's not going to be really healthy, and it's going to compromise your long-term health in the big picture because those things do important work. So the challenges, the ethical and aesthetic values, these are things that are difficult for us to put any kind of dollar on. And some people support these ideas, other people roll their eyes at them. Every species has its own value. As humans, is this our responsibility to protect biodiversity of the planet? Those get into completely different conversations. Those are important conversations. They're not scientific conversations, but they are important things to understand and recognize. So when you do have conversations about preservation with people, sometimes these things are brought up in that conversation and it becomes an important topic. Other times it's a direct financial conversation. You need to understand your audience and you need to be able to speak different ways to different audiences about why they should preserve ecosystems. All right, so we'll keep looking at this